We are going to cover the sport from soup to nuts this week. It is going to be, obviously, top to bottom, the most delicious show that we have had yet this season. And I want to give an immediate shout out right now to my friends at Frank Anthony's in Verona, New Jersey for catering today's show. We've got a lovely pork chop right here, which I'm going to sample shortly. Don't know if I'm going to touch the potatoes. That's still a game time decision. Nice vegetables. And then we have an Uncle Stubby chicken parm inside a panini with some red peppers. If you're looking to gain 5 to 7 pounds by Saturday, this is what you're going to go with for lunch. But thanks again to my friends at Frank Anthony's in Verona, New Jersey. There's also a rumor of some funnel cake fries that have been circling around the studio, which we're going to get to later. Now, I know all week we had promised you an interview with Oregon's Chris Duarte, who has been far and away the best player in the Pac-12 this season. We got word about 10 minutes ago that Chris Duarte will be unavailable today due to issues related to COVID-19. So hopefully we'll connect with him down the road. And I was disappointed because I wanted to talk to Chris Duarte because he's been playing out of his mind. And it's rare in today's day and age that you get a player that excels on both sides of the floor, and he was doing that. He had a combined 14 steals in his last 3 games, in addition to averaging 25 points a game during that span. But I said to myself, if I can sit in front of you, like I did last March when the NCAA tournament was canceled, and tell you, by looking into your eye, that you can't control what happens to you in life, but you can control how you respond, then I owe it to you to give you the best possible show that we can get moving forward, not just this week, but every week from here on in. We're going to have a little bit of nosh time. We're going to obviously dive into this pork chop and tiptoe around this Uncle Stubby's because I'm still trying to fit into this suit. But first, let's get to the topics of the day in a New York minute. And we start, obviously, with Gonzaga. Gonzaga is a team that is going to be obviously at the focal point of college basketball for the rest of the season. But to me, I don't see any way, not that Gonzaga is going to go to Selection Sunday with an undefeated season. I don't see any way that Gonzaga is tested before Selection Sunday. And this is my rationale. We have seen the Zags go against different styles this season. They went against the slow-down pace of Virginia. They went against the brute physicality of West Virginia and the speed and scoring of Iowa. Also played Kansas and Florida. Gonzaga has answered the bell against every team that it's faced so far this season. And with all due respect to teams in the West Coast Conference, you know, I know the league has improved. I know San Francisco won a game earlier this season against Virginia. But without crowds in place, without true home court advantages, I just don't see how a team is going to push Gonzaga in conference play. So not only do I expect Gonzaga to wind up on Selection Sunday with a perfect record, I don't see a real chance that the Zags will be tested. Another big topic in college basketball is obviously what's going on at the University of Kentucky. Kentucky has won 3 straight games entering tonight's tilt against Alabama at Rupp Arena. And the game that really stood out for me was Saturday's triumph over Florida, and that was obviously directly correlated to the return of Keon Brooks, the one player that got repetitions on last year's Kentucky team and now is back again this season. Brooks in 25 minutes at 12 points, 6 rebounds, and 4 assists. Kentucky, to me, looks like a team that will be an absolute nuisance to play in a month, a monumental game tonight for John Calipari's team against Alabama, who has won 5 straight and is playing great basketball, won a game at Tennessee, and is getting elite play out of Herb Jones. And then another topic I want to talk about, because I think it's warranted when you look at what's happened with the conference. The Pac-12 was a league that wanted to stand on its own, and nice mug right here. Shout out to Morning Combat. Obviously another great show on Malcolm Media. Like my mug. Embrace my mug. And, you know, if you're going to be talking to yourself for 25, 30 minutes, you need to get a swig once in a while. But the Pac-12 was a league that opted to move its start date to January 1st and then opted to move it back to November 25th. In that time, we saw the league lose significant non-conference opportunities in college basketball. There were supposed to be a handful of games at Las Vegas for the Pac-12 to play. One of them was Oregon taking on Baylor. That obviously went away. And because there have been so few opportunities for the Pac-12, and because, let's be honest right now, the visibility of the Pac-12 has been a recurring issue because of their television deal, people aren't as familiar with the product nationally. But I look at this league, and I know Arizona isn't eligible for the postseason due to a self-imposed one-year ban, but I see 5 teams right now, UCLA, Oregon, USC, Stanford, and Colorado, as being NCAA tournament caliber teams. I think that's obviously something that we need to keep in mind right now as we are inching closer and closer, about 8 weeks away from Selection Sunday. The Pac-12 looks like a league that should have 4 to 5 teams in the NCAA tournament. And think about how hard it is to schedule if you are a Pac-12 school. One power conference team, according to my calculations, has went out west to play a Pac-12 school. It was Marquette who went out to play UCLA. UCLA, to get a really good game, had to go all the way to Ohio to play Ohio State in the CBS Sports Classic. Arizona State had to go to Mohegan Sun to get a game with Villanova. Stanford had to go to North Carolina to play in the Maui Invitational. Colorado had to go on the road to Tennessee to get a really good opportunity. Oregon had to go to Creighton and play games at Omaha against Missouri and Seton Hall. This is part of the issues that are existing within the Pac-12 that need to be rectified. It's a good league. It has really good players. It has really good coaches. It has really good brands. But ask yourself this question. If Zaire Williams played at North Carolina, how much more regularly would we be talking about him? Now, I'm not obviously, bemoaning his opportunity to go to Stanford. He's been an elite player. But he and Oscar da Silva are 2 of the best players in that conference, and starting to look at times like 2 of the best players in the country. They are not on the national radar because of a lack of visibility and because of a lack of standalone windows for their games to be played. And this is something that comes down to simple scheduling in terms of making sure your product is showcased the right way. The Pac-12 often, and I know they only play games on Thursdays and Saturdays, puts itself in a situation where it will play multiple teams together at the same time. And Thursday is a perfect example. Thursday at 5 o'clock Eastern, you have UCLA, first place in the conference, undefeated even though Chris Smith is out for the year with an injury, playing a very good and very underrated Washington State team at 5 o'clock Eastern. Then, at 5 o'clock Eastern, you also have Stanford with Zaire Williams, with Oscar da Silva, playing on the road at Utah. It doesn't make sense to have arguably the best brand in your league in UCLA, who's in first place, playing at the same time as somebody in Zaire Williams, who is a projected top 10 pick in next year's NBA draft. It doesn't make sense. But the big picture meaning here is the strength of the Pac-12 needs to be looked at from the top perspective. I'm not saying it's the best conference in the country. The bottom of the league is extremely weak. But you also need to take into account that this should be a league that gets 5 teams, maybe 4, in the NCAA tournament. Now, beyond the basketball talk, it's 2021. It's a new year. I have released a couple of new taglines on Twitter. Getting to this pork chop, too, as we notch a little bit right here. Trying to eat a little bit cleaner. The weight sticks on you a little bit more as you get older. Younger fans, younger people, you'll understand that. But released 2 new one-liners. One related to Tennessee, one related to Oregon, not Illinois, I should say. One-liners that seem to be resonating on social media. Tennessee's is nastier than a pack of Dobermans, which you can relate to if you watch this team play. The shirt should be out momentarily, according to my well-embedded moles. And then the genesis of the Illinois one-liner, here comes the pain, and that's pain, P-A-I-G-N, comes from an Al Pacino movie in the 1980s, Carlito's Way. That's a good pork chop. Really good. In the movie, Al Pacino plays Carlito, a.k.a. Carlito Brigante, and in one of the first scenes of the movie, he's caught in a gunfight in a stall, and he yells to the person who he winds up obviously avenging, Here comes the pain. And I was watching that over the holidays, and it made me think of a one-liner for Illinois, and the rest is history. Shirts will be out soon. Another thing I want to hit on before we start taking your questions. Pork chops are very spicy. As I touched on last week, I wasn't familiar. Really spicy. God, I'm dying here. As I touched on last week, I wasn't very familiar with Netflix till about 18 months ago, and I finished up the 3rd season of Cobra Kai. Love the Elizabeth Shue bounce back angle. Thought it was great to have her reintroduced to the series, but the series as a whole is something that you can lose yourself in if you're a child of the 80s or the early 90s. But I want to point out one thing that was happening too much in the 3rd series of Cobra Kai were the flashbacks. There's not enough new character development for me. It seemed like the series couldn't exist unless Ralph Macchio was going back to key parts of Karate Kid 1, 2, or 3. Just somebody, obviously somebody's 2 cents. Keep in mind that I'm somebody who didn't know that Netflix existed until 18 months ago, but roll with it. The pork chop tastes good, and we're having fun here. Well, a couple other things. College basketball related. I felt before the year Connecticut would be a top 3 team in the Big East. They're right on schedule. Dan Hurley, much like he did at Wagner, much like he did at Rhode Island, is turning UConn into a consistent threat at the top of this conference very quickly. And what I mean by that is this. The Huskies improved to 7-1 after the DePaul game on Monday night. And now they're in a scenario where they're finally ranked again in the AP Top 25. And if you're looking at the Big East, you're looking at a league right now where at the top, Villanova is obviously the consensus team to beat. Creighton looks incredible. They scored 97 points last Saturday against St. John's without Marcus Zagorowski. And then after that, you have to start to look at UConn as potentially the 3rd best team in the conference. And remember this, when UConn played Creighton at Gampel Pavilion, they had a 2-point lead at the end of regulation. R.J. Kohler, starting point guard, is on the line with 8 seconds left. He misses 2 free throws. Creighton's Damian Jefferson makes a shot. The game goes into overtime. Tyler Polley didn't play in that game. He's been elite for UConn the last week, but this team is really 1 play away from being undefeated and ranked in the top 10 or 15 of the country. Another thing, big picture thing. The depth of the Big Ten is next level. And when I mean next level, it may be deeper than the 2017 ACC and the 2011 Big East. Now, the 2011 Big East got 11 teams into the NCAA tournament. 16 were in the league. Now, the 2017 ACC, which at the time I felt was significantly deeper than that Big East, and it was, only got 9 teams in the NCAA tournament. But that was, in my opinion, due to a result of the bottom of the league being so good. That league had a 14th place team, NC State, have a lottery pick in Dennis Smith that led NC State to a win that season over Duke at Cameron Indoor Stadium. Is this year's Big Ten going to be capable of having 10 or more teams in the NCAA tournament? This is the way I'm looking at it. Right now, Maryland, okay? Right now, Maryland is in 12th place in the Big Ten. Maryland's just 2-5 in conference play. But the 2 wins for the Terps in league play are at Illinois and at Wisconsin. If Mark Turgeon can just get this team on the bubble, you'd have to think that Maryland is going to have an excellent chance to get the benefit of the doubt from the selection committee because they won those 2 games. That's why people always want to talk about fringe NCAA tournament teams as it relates to your league. You're competing against teams all over the country. And another thing to keep in mind, Penn State, who right now is in 13th place in this conference, is 0-3 in league play, 3-4 overall, but it lost at Michigan and at Indiana, okay, on final possession games. The Indiana game was a 6-point game. The Michigan game was a 2-point game. So the depth of the Big Ten, unparalleled in college basketball. And I think you're looking at right now, last year they would have gotten probably 10 teams in the NCAA tournament. Right now I think they have a legitimate chance to exceed that, especially with Maryland's win over Illinois on Sunday night. And look, I was talking to several people in college basketball after that game. Illinois has the requisites to be a Final Four team, to have its best team since the 2005 team with Darren Williams, D. Brown, Luther Head that went to the national title game and finished 37-2. But you can't give away games like that you should win, because if you're thinking about having a season like that, you're thinking about obviously getting a high seed in the NCAA tournament. This is something that everybody should keep in mind when people talk about the term, well, they're a Final Four caliber team, so on and so forth. Because Illinois has stubbed its toe a couple of times, and now they're 9-4 overall. They had the Maryland loss. It affects your potential NCAA tournament seed. There's a lot of time before Selection Sunday. We're 61 days away. But Gonzaga is going to be a 1 seed. Baylor, you would think, is going to be a 1 seed, even though Baylor is obviously, going to have a lot of wars ahead of them in the Big 12. Villanova would probably, you would think, be on track to be a 1 seed. And the 4th spot right now, if the tournament was going to start this week, would probably be Iowa or Texas. That means you have to go through one of those teams. I know things can change in a tournament setting, but you probably have to go through one of those teams to get to a Final Four. If Illinois has to go through Baylor, who already beat them by double figures, Gonzaga or Villanova, it's going to be an arduous task for the Illini. My point is this. Illinois had a chance to continue to cement itself in the Big Ten, and it blew an opportunity. And tonight we're going to see another Big Ten team in Michigan that's undefeated play Wisconsin. It'll be the toughest game that Michigan has played so far this season. Demetrius Trice is playing out of his mind for Wisconsin. Michigan, okay, a perfect 10-0. And I also think we overreact too much in college basketball to one game. Iowa lost the game on December 19th against Gonzaga and then played Minnesota on Christmas night and was in a situation where it had a 3-point lead with 10 seconds to play. Marcus Carr gets a 3-point shot off. Iowa doesn't foul. Nails the shot. Minnesota wins in overtime. If that doesn't happen, if Iowa just fouls, Iowa's got one loss since the Gonzaga. I've been watching the Hawkeyes the last 2 games. They are so much more than just Luka Garza. Jordan Bohannon is back on track, and Fran McCaffrey is really doing a great job at developing his bench. He's got 3 guys coming off the bench. Jack Nungy, Keegan Bradley, and Patrick McCaffrey that would start on a lot of Big Ten teams. Just all things to keep in mind. And the narrative around the Big Ten and the storyline about the depth of the Big Ten, that's not going to go away between now and Selection Sunday. That is going to be a common thing that you're going to hear ad nauseum in terms of a storyline, because here's the facts. You've got a league, and I'm somebody who writes a column every day, that gravitates towards the college basketball fan, because you've got a legitimate chance to have double-digit teams in the NCAA tournament. And I don't know if they're going to win a national championship for the first time since 2000, but you've got a league that has the opportunity to have multiple teams in the Final Four. All right. I'm stuffing my face. Haven't heard from you. Let's get to our favorite segment right now, because it involves you, the people. Don't at me, bro. Let's get to your questions on Twitter. First question comes from Mikey Erzens. John, with net ranking and teams showing the ability to schedule teams on short notice during the pandemic, is it time to bring back bracket buster games for the mid-majors? I don't know if that will do mid-majors enough justice, Mike. I just think mid-majors, and this includes a lot of non-power conferences who have performed well the last couple of years, I think they're just getting squeezed out of having multiple teams from their league in the NCAA tournament. Next up. This comes from New York Sports Seasons. John, what's wrong with Rutgers and how do they fix it? Rutgers needs to get Cliff Omoruyi back healthy. They're, top 50 recruit, freshman big man. The thing that made Rutgers dominant and formidable early in the season, they didn't have one really good big man. They had two with him and with Miles Johnson. And look, Rutgers, since obviously the Ohio State game in Columbus, doesn't have great front court depth. And we saw that in the Ohio State game in December when Rutgers had a lead in the game. Miles Johnson got into foul trouble, completely changed the complexity. They got to get healthy. They got to get Cliff Omoruyi back. This next question comes from CBB tonight. It's John. If Gonzaga goes into the tournament undefeated, what team do you think could beat them in the early rounds? There's no way to even possibly forecast that until we see the bracket. But I will say this. The only team that I think could affect Gonzaga is a physical team that plays a slower tempo and is not going to be, obviously, afraid of playing in the mud. Now, West Virginia, to me, was the most competitive team with Gonzaga. Important to note, though, this. Jalen Suggs, remember, was injured in that game, didn't play the whole game. But that type of a team is one to keep in mind. Next up. Matthew Hendricks' question is, do you think that Western Kentucky will make the NCAA tournament or the NIT? Great question. Western Kentucky has an interesting resume because you think about it. Western Kentucky did a lot of good during the non-conference portion of the schedule. Won a game at Alabama, beat Memphis, beat Northern Iowa when it had A.J. Green up and running. But Western Kentucky has lost games in league play the last 2 weeks. Charlotte and Louisiana Tech. That is something that is happening in a lot of mid-major leagues this year because of the situation that's existing of teams playing 2 games in the same setting in a span of a couple days. It is very difficult to beat teams back-to-back. Next up. Grant McCullough, thoughts on Trace Jackson, an All-American, one of the best players in the country. Knows what he's good at and is good at what he knows, embraces it. Easy question. This is from Just Greg, and it's John. Is the Big Ten as strong as people are suggesting, or does it appear that way because the bottom-level teams have improved this year? Good question. We just talked about it during our Notch segment. The Big Ten is as strong as people are suggesting, and yeah, I mean, we're in a scenario now where if the tournament started today, you would say without hesitation that 12 teams are in contention for the NCAA tournament, especially after Maryland's big win against Illinois on Sunday night. We'll see what Penn State has up its sleeve. Fletcher Proctor wants to know why Tom Crean can't keep the in-state talent other than the Ant-Man in-state. It's a good question. Georgia plays Auburn tonight. Georgia's recruited some of the best players in the South. One of them, as you mentioned, they got, and Anthony Edwards. It's interesting. Everybody in this business have always talked to me about the Georgia job as being a sleeping giant, but nobody has really ever hit it big there. Jim Harrick was close, obviously got into trouble. Tubby Smith in the 90s before he went to Kentucky was close, but it's very difficult because it's perceived, in my opinion, as a football school for Georgia to change that narrative. Next up. This is from Caleb Clark and Sean. Who has been the most underrated scorer in college basketball, in your opinion, this season? For me, it's Chris Duarte, who we were supposed to have on today, but unfortunately couldn't join us due to an issue related to COVID-19. Chris Duarte is separating himself as the best player in the Pac-12, and I know that there's players in that league who have more long-term potential. USC's Evan Mobley, Arizona State's Josh Christopher, and this is in terms of NBA potential. Stanford's Zaire Williams, but right now, Chris Duarte has been the best player in the Pac-12. Tim Crawford writes, do you predict that Iowa will run the table until their matchup with Illinois in Champaign? Well, let's just double check that right now. We want to get the schedule out here and just Go over this with a fine-tooth comb. Iowa's upcoming schedule: at Northwestern, home Indiana, home Nebraska, and they got Michigan State Thursday. I would expect Iowa to win all those games. Now, anything can happen in the Big Ten. We've seen that. Northwestern obviously won a game at Indiana and against Ohio State. But, yeah, I would expect Iowa to win all those games. Again, Iowa's a team, and I know I'm speaking, ad nauseum here, but really, with the exception of, and again, the Minnesota game they had, with the exception of the game at Rutgers, which it won by 2 points, it's dominated its other games in Big Ten play, with the exception of the Minnesota loss. It's from Adam Mark. Since, John, do you think Demetric Trice can be the go-to guy to close out games for Wisconsin in the tournament? He's been on a tear recently, averaging over 20 a game in his last 4. And the one thing that you look at with this Wisconsin team is it's not really a team like we saw in 14 or 15 under Bo Ryan. There's no Sam Decker. There's no Frank Kaminsky. So, yeah, if there's a guy that I would expect to take the last shot, it would be Demetric Trice. Illinois theme continues. This is from Sports Chatter MJ. Why is Illinois so inconsistent? Can they eventually make a Final Four run? I think they're definitely still a Final Four contender. My thing from watching the game on Sunday night, and again, and I love this kid, but Andre Curbelo was a little bit too ambitious for me at the end of that game. Coburn, DeSumo were dominant in this game. Those are the guys that got to get the bulk of the touches. This is our final one. This is from Larry D. Hart, and it's, John, if Alabama beats Kentucky, do they finally get a one-liner? One-liners, as I've said before time and time again, are not something that you can force. They either just happen organically or they don't happen at all. I'm kicking some things around in the lab for Nate Oates, but for all intents and purposes, those are something that can't be forced. Now, we're going to look at some games to watch for tonight in college basketball. Several big ones on the slate. A golden opportunity for Virginia Tech. Hokies 9-2 on the season, hosting Duke. Now, Duke announced right before we went on the air that Jalen Johnson, their 5-star freshman, will be a game-time decision. He hasn't played in weeks due to a foot injury. Virginia Tech, remember, already has a win this season over Villanova at Mohegan Sun, a big opportunity for Mike Young's team. We've talked a lot about Alabama and Kentucky, and I'm telling you guys, if you have not watched Herb Jones, Alabama's point forward, you are missing one of the more unique players in college basketball. Does a little bit of everything. He's the key to the Crimson Tide. Reminds me a lot of a young Stacey Augmon. Wisconsin against Michigan and Ann Arbor will be the toughest game that Michigan has played this season. It's also the first meeting against the Badgers for Mike Smith, Michigan's starting point guard, the grad transfer from Columbia, and Hunter Dickinson, who is another guy who's playing like an All-American right now. Then you also have Kansas against Oklahoma State, Bill Self against his alma mater, going against Cade Cunningham. So a lot of big games tonight. Now let's wrap things up with our news and nuggets segment as we continue a little bit of nosh. And I'm going to go to my Hulkamania lunchbox right here and see what we have in store. I believe these are the funnel cake fries, and they are. Let's just give these a whirl right here. This is dangerous. Oh, my God. This is crazy. You feel like you're back on Coney Island or on the boardwalk at Seaside right now. This is unbelievable. So sweet. Big week for Texas Tech. Big week for Chris Beard. Texas Tech will play Texas in Austin on Wednesday, then come back to play Baylor. We still don't know just how good the Red Raiders are. Their best win this season, a 2-point triumph at Oklahoma. So good. Next up, Tyrese Martin is emerging as Robin for UConn to James Bouknight as Batman. He is in a situation where he's averaging over his last 4 games about 13 points and 8 rebounds. This is the Rhode Island transfer. Could be a big key to controlling the Huskies' ceiling down the road. And then lastly, we talked about the depth of the Big Ten. Nebraska is clearly the weakest team in the league. But with that said, the Cornhuskers were in a one-possession game with Indiana on Sunday night. It shows you, again, just how deep this league is. But before we get too excited, about NCAA tournament bids, remember what I said and how it related to the ACC a couple years ago. When you have a league that is really deep, from 1 to 14, the bottom of the league is capable of eating the middle. That affects the potential to have more than 10 teams, or significantly more than 10 teams, in the NCAA tournament. Now, there is no bottom of this league, but what was projected at the bottom, again, capable of eating up the middle. Want to thank you for joining us again here on Stuff with Jon Rothstein. We'll be back next week, same bad time, same bad channel. Stay positive, test negative, and remember, in the airport of life, college basketball is the Delta Sky Club. Meet off the phone here. Tough.